The courtroom was jammed shoulder to shoulder. She entered alone, split lip, wrists cuffed. They called her the danger, while the officer's blow vanished into silence. No one seemed to care about the footage she'd captured until a woman in the back row rose just enough to catch the light, and the air changed. What happens when the person they tried to shame turns out to be the daughter of someone who knows how to break a system cleanly? If you believe in quiet justice, this will sit under your ribs. I remember her shoes more than anything else. That soft whisper of rubber on tile as they steered her toward Courtroom B, the smallest room, paint flaking like old snow, a busted clock above the bench permanently stuck in pretend time. Nobody really noticed her at first. A slight girl, hands locked together in front, near silent, 16. They read her name as Maya Dalton and called the charge interfering with police. But what really put her here on a Wednesday morning was a video. Officer Trevor Benton shoving an elderly black man to the ground, without warning, without cause. Maya didn't run, she didn't shout, she filmed. A few thousand people watched before someone made sure there'd be a price. When they brought her in, it wasn't dramatic. No wailing, no clatter, just that thick hush rooms get when a verdict already hangs like fog. You could feel it in the glances that slid across her, verdicts rendered without a word. Benton stood near the witness table, arms folded, stare fixed like a bolt. He didn't bother hiding the contempt, the way some men look at anything they think should have stayed small. Maya didn't return it. She sat beside her public defender, steady as a nail. Her lawyer, Riley Tan, flipped through a thin folder like he'd find very little and knew it. She didn't speak, didn't fidget. When Benton started toward her, measured steps, that swagger that passes for certainty, I assumed he'd address the judge, maybe clear a procedural point. He didn't angle toward the bench. He angled for Maya. He leaned in, said something I couldn't catch. Maybe no one could. Maya didn't blink. Her face didn't give a thing away. And then Benton lifted his hand and slapped her, flat and hard, sharp enough to ricochet off plaster and turn my stomach to ice. For a full beat, no one moved. Not the judge, not the bailiff, not even the defense seated inches away. The room didn't freeze in confusion. It stalled in fear, or worse, in habit. I remember turning to Judge Rowan Keene, waiting for outrage, sanction, anything. He didn't even glance up, eyes pinned to paper, pen hovering, like none of this lived in his zip code. The bailiff looked, hesitated, drifted back to statue. And Maya, slow as a sunrise, turned her head. Blood gathered on her lower lip. She didn't touch it. She studied Benton like a diagram. Then, with a careful calm that tightened my chest, she lifted her cuffed hands, wiped the blood, and said, clear but quiet, "You just turned this federal." 5 words sank heavier than the slap. Benton stepped back, not on orders, but because certainty shifted under his boots. Maybe it was her tone. Maybe it was how the room suddenly recalibrated around her. From the last row, a woman moved a fraction. She adjusted her watch, an easy, practiced motion. She didn't speak, didn't blink. She wasn't surprised. Her presence read like preparation, like she had arrived, knowing the script and the rewrite. She didn't gasp when Maya was hit. She didn't rise, didn't scold. She didn't have to. And right then I felt it, a tilt in the floorboards, a power line humming under the plaster. The story we thought we were watching wasn't the story at all. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a stage set. Someone had arranged the props. Someone else was ready to rearrange them. The quiet woman's face stayed unreadable, posture casual. But nothing about her was accidental. Not here. Not today. We were about to learn who had really been taking notes the whole time. After the slap, that drab hush drifted back down like dust. The machinery resumed, but not toward justice. Benton returned to the stand as if nothing had happened. No apology, no pause. He squared his uniform, leaned into the mic, and delivered a narrative polished to a bureaucratic shine. Maya, he said, hadn't calmly recorded a wrong. She had escalated a lawful encounter, got mouthy, interfered, resisted. He spoke with a sort of confidence men wear when institutions will catch them every time they fall. Each syllable landed tidy, rehearsed, like he was reciting from a training binder. No one interrupted. The assistant district attorney, Elise Marsh, sat legs crossed at the ankle, legal pad resting on her lap, mostly ignored. Blonde hair tucked sharply behind her ears, pearl studs catching the weak lights. She looked like she'd done this 100 times and planned to do it 100 more. When Benton finished, she didn't probe, didn't test the seams. A single nod, almost to herself, expected, routine, resolved. Then she looked at Maya, not with concern or scorn, but with that clinical indifference that chills straight through the coat. Judge Keene finally stirred to life. He picked up his pen and wrote, slow, precise. He didn't ask Maya if she had anything to say. He didn't acknowledge her at all. He didn't look her way once. A few lines scratched onto the docket, a cap flicked shut, a form handed to the clerk, like he'd checked milk off a list. From where I sat, Maya shrank, not because she was small, but because they treated her like she'd been erased on arrival. I kept waiting for someone to break the program. Riley shifted, cleared his throat, began a sentence, and swallowed it back down. Maybe he was brand new. Maybe he'd sat through this choreography before and knew how these endings land. He leaned toward Maya, murmured something barely there. She didn't answer. She didn't look. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tiles, like they might tell a version of truth the room had forgotten. And still in the back row, the woman who'd turned her watch now held a notepad. She wasn't typing. She wrote by hand, slow and steady, as if permanence mattered. No flinch, no blink at the obvious cruelty. Something in her patience said she'd rehearsed this moment already. She wasn't surprised because she'd expected the door to stick. She hadn't come as a bystander. She occupied the space like a purpose. And still, none of the official faces clocked her. Not Keene, not Marsh, not Benton, who'd folded his hands like he'd just filed a clean report. Maya's wrists remained cuffed. The blood dried to rust. She didn't move. She didn't request to speak. But you could feel pressure building in the silence around her, as if quiet itself were a stance, a plan, a breath before impact. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent hymn overhead. The clock above the bench pretended to keep time. I realized my lungs had been holding still. I waited for somebody, anybody, to rip open the script, but nobody did. Not yet. I thought maybe that was it. They'd wrap the day, bury Maya's stillness as the closing line. Then Riley stood. His voice carried steadier than I expected, like a man crossing a creek on rock tips. He asked to present new evidence, a time-stamped video from a store across the street. It showed Benton's shove. More than that, it captured Maya stepping in, a slim shield between harm and harm. He explained all of it while slotting in a flash drive. The clerk wheeled over a monitor. The judge looked bored, the ADA halfway elsewhere. But a ripple passed through the benches. I leaned forward. The grainy footage came alive, distant, but crisp enough where it mattered. The older man had a cane. He moved careful, scared. Benton's posture read pure threat. He said something we couldn't hear, then shoved hard. The man staggered, and Maya entered the frame, arms out, not striking, just holding space where none existed for him. She caught him, steadied him, and stayed. For one suspended second, the room actually breathed together. Then Judge Keene leaned back and dismissed it with a half wave, eyes still fixed on paper. Unverified, he said. Lacking proper authentication. Not admissible. Riley tried to argue chain of custody, but the judge shut the door before the latch could catch. The ADA offered a tiny private smile. Nice clip, she said lightly. Doesn't make it evidence. The screen dimmed. The cord was pulled. The truth buried itself where dust goes. A woman behind me let out a breath like a glass cracking under hot water. No one shouted. We got the kind of quiet that settles into flooring, part resignation, part bruise. Benton leaned toward the officer behind him, a colleague in uniform, Officer Harlow, who'd been silent all morning, arms crossed, jaw set. Benton whispered something, and I caught the tail end. She won't hold. The way he said it belonged to a different conversation. Not about court anymore, about breaking a person by hours, wearing her until quiet cracked and collapsed. Maya didn't react. She stared at the dead monitor like it still played something to anyone willing to keep looking. She didn't look at her lawyer, judge, or jury. She looked nowhere, and somehow she didn't sit alone. In the back, the woman with the notepad, still and deliberate, watched the footage get dismissed without a twitch. Her eyes tightened half a degree. She touched the side of her watch again. One precise, quiet contact, more mark than fidget. No one else seemed to notice. They watched the plug come out of the wall. They watched the judge pretend the screen had always been blank. But I saw the watch, and I felt that tap chalk, a line only a few could read. The law pronounced itself. The court decided what counts and what doesn't, but the image had landed. A kid lifting her arms like a small dam against a tide adults wouldn't stem. It planted deeper than pixels. The woman, her name I'd learn, was Lauren Price. Hadn't come to spectate. She'd come to remember the ones who looked away. Maybe to settle accounts later. Just as the room sagged back into its weary rhythm, the door swung, and Officer Harlow stepped in fully. Boots quiet, a triangle of folded paper in hand. He told the clerk he was here for an evidence check. No one asked why. No one questioned the hour. Keene didn't glance up. A nod passed like a shrug. Ada Marsh didn't blink. Silence authorized everything. Harlow turned toward the defense table. Benton joined him like it had been rehearsed. He wasn't called. He just slid in. Riley placed a hand on Maya's backpack and kept his voice low, measured, strained. He asked what they expected to find. Harlow didn't answer. Benton didn't meet his eyes. Marsh handled the line without looking up. Standard procedure. File complaints later. Later. It was always later. The euphemism for never. Benton reached for the bag, not violent, just entitled, and set it on the table. He unzipped wide and started taking things out, piece by piece, as if taking apart a person. At first there was a neat order, notebooks, a pen case, a folder. Then order broke like a cheap hinge. Pages got shaken loose. Homework slid to the floor. A foil-wrapped sandwich thudded and stayed. A water bottle was opened, sniffed, tossed sideways. Harlow dug through smaller pockets and dumped their contents. Colored pencils rolled. A photo with bent corners slipped and vanished. A shoe caught a sheet and creased it. No one said a word. Riley froze, mouth open. Then he stood and tried again, voice pitched higher, objection shaped like plea. Marsh cut him off with a flat, steady tone. They're doing their job. That was all. A juror shifted like a spring flexing. A woman in the gallery stared hard at her hands. The hum of lights got louder. Maya didn't move, hands cuffed in her lap. She watched her life get sorted like trash. When they finished, the table looked scavenged. Then Maya stood, still quiet, and walked to gather her things, deliberate as a surgeon recombining organs. She started with the sandwich, folding the foil back into its original shape, placing it gently inside. She collected papers one by one. She slid the photo into a folder's pocket. She reclaimed pens, pencils, breath. Her hands trembled once, barely there, then settled. No one helped. Not the officers, not her attorney, not the judge, not anyone watching. In the back row, Lauren Price did not move, did not speak. Her eyes tracked every motion like she was writing in her head. The notebook closed. The pen lay still. Everything about her restraint read like muscle memory. When Maya returned to her seat, she zipped the backpack slowly, the sound tiny against the system's big silence. Lauren lifted her wrist and tapped the watch's side. Once, then again, two crisp, private gestures. No beep, no flash, no observable reply. Just a glint off the face. To those who knew what to see, that was enough. The hearing surfaced again like nothing happened. Keene scribbled another line. Marsh shifted her files. Harlow and Benton sat like blank columns. The clerk restacked folders. Maya's half-packed bag sat like a chest reclaimed after a raid. Her stillness changed temperature. Something had been crossed that wouldn't be undone by paperwork. Somewhere in that quiet, a line was drawn not by the court, but by another hand. The room idled, the bad kind of quiet, heavy, humming beneath the skin, the pre-break silence of a pressure cooker. Maya's hands rested folded over the bag, fingers interlaced, cuffs biting the bones, back straight, eyes fixed slightly past the clerk's desk, unblinking. Then, with the same casual care she'd used to rearrange her life, she slipped her right hand into the front pouch. No sneaking, just deliberate. She came up with a folded note. Without looking sideways, without adjusting posture, she passed it to Riley. He blinked, hesitated, took it. He unfolded quickly, like expecting a list or a question. Instead, a handful of words, neat and tiny. Don't act. They're watching. I'm ready. He read it again, slower. Then his eyes climbed to her face. She didn't look at him. No tilt, no glance. She breathed, measured. Something at her wrist caught his eye. The watch. It had been there the whole time, mostly hidden by her sleeve. He leaned a fraction for a better look and froze on what it wasn't. It wasn't a kid's smartwatch. It wasn't showy. Matte band, metal clasp, plain enough to fade, sturdy enough to imply design. No logo, no flash. No way it came from a kiosk by the food court. His eyes narrowed, like a remembered lecture unearthed itself. Agency gear disguised for civilian rooms, emergency signals built into ordinary objects. Watches just like that. Maya still hadn't moved. Riley wetted his lips. A whisper, meant to vanish on contact. Who's watching? She didn't answer right away. She turned her head, for the first time all morning, to meet his eyes for a breath. No fear in them, no panic, just something older, flintier, a knowledge he hadn't yet earned. Then she looked away, deliberately, toward the gallery's back row, toward the woman in the dark blazer who'd been stone still since the gavel fantasy began. For the first time since entering, Maya met her mother's gaze, and Lauren Price met it back. No nod, no wink, no performance. Just a clean connection that cracked the air like static. Then Maya faced forward again, expression smoothing back to unreadable. The moment existed, and everyone who saw it understood it, rearranged the furniture inside this room. Riley didn't speak again. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket like it might catch fire if left open to air. He sat still, posture shifting by degrees, the way a man adjusts and to realize the floor is a trapdoor. And I felt something loosen and tighten at once. The attention in the room tilted. For the first time since she entered, Maya wasn't alone on the chessboard. Whatever was coming had already started its walk. The hearing drifted back to its faux normal rhythm. Papers lifted, pens clicked, chairs sighed, the clock pretended to tick. For a long stretch, Maya remained motionless. The court settled into that tight, controlled quiet that felt like being held under a sheet. Pages turned. Someone in the gallery coughed into a sleeve. The clerk's pen clicked, clicked, clicked. Then Benton leaned forward. He didn't move his mouth much, but his voice carried just enough to be heard, pitched for Maya. No one's here for you, he murmured, not even your mother. He leaned back like he'd dropped a pebble into a well. The water barely rippled, but I watched the ripple run the length of the room anyway. Maya didn't bite. She didn't gift him even a flinch. She looked like a person memorizing sounds for later. Lauren in the back row didn't lift her head. She didn't write. She was the stillness itself. I thought about the first thing she'd done, the watch adjustment, and what it meant to set a clock to something only a few people could hear. Systems rely on no one marking time, honestly. The judge droned through scheduling. The ADA summarized the state's view in a tone that treated breath like a privilege. The bailiff checked a door with slow, theatrical boredom. Riley rose again and asked, carefully, to preserve the defense's objections for the record. Chain of custody, evidentiary exclusion, the strike across the defendant's face. Keene nodded mechanically, eyes on the docket, already bored with the idea of a record that contradicted his comfort. The court calendar rolled forward like a stubborn wheel. Dates set, motions promised, burdens shifted. Every bureaucratic phrase felt like insulation around a wire still humming from the slap. I watched Benton's jaw work, as if chewing on the room's helplessness. Harlow barely blinked. Marsh stacked her pads to perfect right angles and waited. The hearing eased toward its endpoint, that slow drift everyone recognizes, the part where nothing unexpected should happen. Keene began reciting a schedule that sounded like a weather forecast only bureaucrats enjoy. Then Lauren's pen returned to her hand, but she didn't write. She turned it once between her fingers, a motion that felt almost like a metronome tick. She watched her daughter with a gaze so controlled it could pass for disinterest. But attention like that is a blade. It doesn't flicker, it cuts. The clerk announced a recess that tasted less like rest and more like staging. Bailiff called the room to half rise. People shifted, stretched, murmured. Benton stood, and for a second his eyes landed on Lauren with a brief, puzzled squint, like a dog catching an unfamiliar scent. Then he dismissed it, turned back toward Harlow, and talked with his hands low at his belt. Riley leaned toward Maya again. "Do you want?" he started. She shook her head once. "Not now." She reached into the bag again and pulled out nothing, as if to remind herself it was hers. The older man from the video wasn't there, but he occupied a chair anyway. Recess hemmed itself back up, and everyone reassumed positions like actors who'd been given their marks in chalk. Keene returned. The clerk announced the next segment: custodial status, property disposition, all the language used to describe a body and its belongings. Harlow's paper moved forward. The standard evidence check got logged, as though we hadn't watched a bag get ransacked already. Marsh's voice found that neutral gear again, explaining almost pleasantly how routine protected fairness. Routine, like rain. Riley asked to postpone further searches until counsel could be present. Keene said a version of no that wore a lab coat. Harlow and Benton stepped back to the table. Riley kept his palm planted on the backpack, like touch might be the only jurisdiction left to him. "We've already completed our review," Harlow announced, as if the earlier chaos had been a museum tour. Benton shrugged at nothing. Keene made another mark on the docket. Marsh folded her hands like prayer if prayer believed in filing cabinets. Maya's eyes didn't move. Lauren's watch didn't flash. It didn't need to. I thought about how grief and fury feel different when you aim them. One burns you up, the other burns a path. The bailiff posted himself at the door, the picture of compliance. A juror coughed into his elbow. Someone in the second row needed to sneeze and swallowed it. Benton shifted his weight and let his knuckles rap once against the table. An unconscious drumbeat to a song he thought he knew. Maya crossed and uncrossed her ankles, the first movement in a while. Keene asked if there were any additional motions. Riley said he'd file written ones. Marsh said a set of words that meant nothing further, in lawyer. Harlow's mouth barely smiled like a zipper, forgetting how to hold. Lauren finally opened her notebook again. This time she wrote one line, just one. The pen slowed at the end and lifted. She closed the cover softly as if sound mattered. The watch's face caught the weak overhead light like a coin at the bottom of a creek, visible only if you'd come looking. The room's temperature hadn't changed, but I realized a current ran under everything. It was too small for them to feel, or maybe too familiar to register. Anyone who lives in systems like this learns to sense that current and to ride it without splashing. Keene moved to remand conditions. Benton's posture lengthened. Marsh's eyes didn't bother pretending. Riley made one more gentle, necessary noise. About the slap, about the video, about respect for a body. Keene said he hadn't seen the slap, and the video lacked proper authentication. He said those words like he was reading a grocery list. The bailiff maintained his patience. Harlow's chin angled toward the clock, which insisted it was some hour it wasn't. A woman in the first row twisted a wedding band slowly. Maya blinked finally. She breathed in a fraction deeper. The room pretended not to notice. We rolled forward into bond talk. Numbers rose and fell like tides controlled by a moon we couldn't see. Marsh stood and painted Maya as a disruptor, wrapped in sweetness, a potential risk disguised in quiet. Riley cited school attendance, no prior record, family ties. He said family ties without glancing back at Lauren. Keene set conditions that tasted like punishment squeezed into paperwork. Nothing dramatic. Bureaucracy rarely is. But I could feel a border shifting. Something about the way Lauren sat so still, so ready, made me think of people trained to wait until waiting itself becomes action. When the gavel sound finally came, a dry clack that might as well have been a file drawer closing, the bailiff called the next case in a tone that suggested nothing here would ever surprise him again. Maya stood. Riley shifted the bag toward her. Benton's eyes tracked everything, the way a cat's eyes track a moth, lazy until suddenly not. Harlow rolled his shoulders once. Marsh checked a text or a ghost and slipped the phone away. The gallery exhaled. People shuffled. Shoes talked to tile. The broken clock's face looked down on all of it like a bad joke. They moved Maya toward a side door. Lauren didn't stand, didn't wave, didn't do any of the things a mother who wanted the room's approval might do. She simply watched, pen still, watched quiet, mouth pressed into a straight line that didn't tremble. Benton murmured to Harlow again, low and private. The words didn't carry, but the shape of them did. A confidence that this, too, would grind her down. Riley walked close, whispering counsel's promises, appeals, filings, next steps, words meant to be steps. Maya nodded once, tiny. I thought, not for the first time, that nods can be anchors. Outside, the hallway held the same stale air and the same municipal paint color, that invented beige that tries to be neutral and lands as surrender. A vending machine hummed like it had a secret. An officer laughed at something that wasn't funny across the corridor. Benton peeled away to speak to someone with a clipboard. Harlow hovered. Marsh walked down the hall without turning her head. Lauren came out a beat later, unhurried. She didn't go to Maya. She went to the side, leaned against the wall like a woman waiting for a train she's already timed. Riley asked permission to speak briefly with his client. A nod came that meant make it fast. He knelt to eye level and kept his voice soft. We'll challenge this. I'll get the video, authenticate it. Maya listened the way people listen when a road's already drawn on a map they don't fully trust. She glanced once, just once at her mother. Lauren's face stayed cool, but something in the line of her shoulders eased by a fraction. Benton finished his chat and sent a look down the hall that slid right over Lauren like she was empty space. If he'd truly seen her, he might have recognized a type, a federal investigator turned trainer, the kind who learns patience until it becomes a weapon. Instead, he saw nothing but a woman with a notebook who didn't demand attention. That is exactly how the trained like it. A deputy called a time. Riley squeezed Maya's shoulder, brief, human. Maya breathed out, a stitch of air that didn't qualify as relief. The vending machine hummed like a witness, wishing it could testify. Somewhere inside the courtroom, the next case began, another life sinking into forms and forecasts. They turned Maya back toward the door where officers wait. Harlow's grip was impersonal. Benton's was not. Lift your chin, he said, like he owned the angle of her bones. She didn't. Lauren slid her notebook into her bag, stood, and pressed a thumb against the watch face. One short press. The kind of press that doesn't read as anything unless you already know what it is. She walked down the hall without hurry and vanished through a door marked in tiny letters, staff only. No one stopped her. No one challenged her. That's the thing about confidence. Doors obey. Back inside, the judge moved through names, like weather, across a map. The ADA performed stability. The bailiff performed patience. The clerk performed precision. It's remarkable how much theater can pass for truth when everyone agrees to clap in the right places. Maya kept her eyes on a scuff mark on the threshold, a small crescent where shoes had chewed the paint. Benton leaned closer and let his breath carry a hiss only she could hear. You'll break, he said, like a weather prediction. Maya blinked slow, like closing a door from the inside. Harlow watched, saying nothing. She glanced toward the monitor, now dark. A ghostly reflection of her cuffed hands hovered there. I wondered whether she was composing a memory she could trust later when every official record tried to substitute its own. Riley looked like a man measuring the distance between what he owed and what he could deliver. He put a hand on the bag again. I kept thinking about Lauren's watch and the two taps earlier. Communications that never ask permission make different futures possible. Benton cracked his knuckles like punctuation. The fluorescent hum pulled every thought toward the floor's dull shine. Time dragged. The hearing's tail thinned. Paperwork arranged itself into neat stacks. Someone coughed without covering. A deputy scolded a whisper with a look. Maya shifted her shoulders once. A small reset. The cuff chain clinked. Riley asked again to preserve his objections. Keene nodded. Marsh said noted, in a tone that hid a yawn. The bailiff opened the door, a crack, and let in a slice of hallway air that somehow smelled like dust and coffee. Benton rotated his wrist as though stretching a tendon. Harlow blinked twice in the slow way cops learned to blink. When they finally uncoupled the cuffs, Maya rubbed her wrists for exactly 1 second, then set her hands flat on the table. She looked at them the way climbers study a wall. Lauren reappeared near the rear exit, drifting like she belonged to the architecture. She didn't look at Benton or Harlow. She looked at the clock like she had forgiven it for lying. The clerk announced a continuance date. If you listened carefully, you could hear futures being bartered in those casual syllables. "We'll be ready," Riley said. He sounded like a man promising a bridge over a river. Lauren lifted her wrist again and tapped, 2 quick touches against the watch's edge. No sound. But if you've ever worked with field gear, you know the language. Somewhere, a receiver would log the time and place. Somewhere, a thread would be pulled. The people who knew her would mark the moment with a pin and a circle. Maya's eyes flicked toward her mother for a heartbeat, then returned to neutral. Benton stretched his mouth into a smile that wasn't a smile. Harlow scraped a chair an inch and let it stop. The room went back to pretending. Maya's bag sat complete again. If you looked closely, her life was repacked in a different order than before. That's what violations do. They leave you needing to reorganize so your hands know where to go. She didn't cry. She didn't bargain. Something had been crossed, and in crossing it, something else had been claimed. Keene made another notation. Marsh ran a finger along a page's edge and flattened a curl. The bailiff checked his watch and scowled like time had personally inconvenienced him. Lauren's posture shifted by a fraction, barely enough to see, more than enough to mean. A long quiet returned, the kind that swells behind the ribs. You could hear every small noise, a shoe squeak, a paper edge tearing slightly, breath carried too sharply through the nose. Maya slid her right hand into the bag again, no hurry, and felt around until her fingers closed on a folded scrap. She brought it up and laid it near Riley's hand. He unfolded it and found only 3 short lines, all purpose. Don't move. Don't object. Wait. His eyes met hers. She was watching the air just past him, as though music only she could hear had cued the downbeat. Riley's glance slid to her wrist. The watch he finally understood wasn't from a mall kiosk. He angled his body to block Benton's view. "Who's your contact?" he breathed. Maya didn't answer. She turned, only for a second, toward the last row. Lauren's gaze took hers and held. It didn't soften, it steadied. You could feel the room's temperature shift a tenth of a degree. People never notice tenths until the glass fogs. Riley swallowed his next sentence. He tucked the note away. He looked like someone who had just been invited into a circle and wasn't sure he wanted membership. Riley returned his focus to the table. The clerk asked a housekeeping question about exhibits that weren't really exhibits. Keene answered like an answering machine. Marsh made a gesture that meant later. Benton checked a scuff on his holster with an absent thumb. Harlow glanced at the doorway again, like he expected someone who hadn't arrived to arrive exactly when he counted to 5. He didn't count out loud. Lauren wrote another single line, tore the page with clean edges, folded it once, and tucked it under her notebook's back cover. Nothing about her motion asked for attention. The bailiff called for order in the gentlest way possible. Just the words, no bass. People quieted, chairs stilled. The room's heartbeat slowed to that municipal thrum you only hear in buildings where light never fully changes. Maya moved her shoulders again, and the chain made its small bell-like clink. She turned her face enough to catch the monitor's dark screen, and I imagined how memory would keep looping its own cut. Her arms out, the cane, the shove. Benton let his eyelids fall halfway like he might nap. Harlow's hand found his pen and spun it one rotation. Lauren pressed her thumb against the watch face, longer this time, then released. If you knew the hardware, you'd know a long press does something a short one doesn't. She stood and stepped into the aisle, not toward Maya, but toward the back exit. The ADA noticed movement and frowned without meaning to. Benton's eyes tracked Lauren's path and then dismissed it again, because men like him only register what announces itself in capital letters. The door whispered shut behind Lauren. The judge spoke another piece of scheduling that sounded like a sigh. Riley watched the door as if reading a map. Minutes thinned. The room's choreography oiled itself once more. The state's machine kept churning, stamp, staple, set. The defense machine kept promising paper storms. Nothing visible had changed, but every gesture carried a different gravity now, like a planet you can't see had slid into orbit. Maya's hands lay flat again. Benton leaned, just slightly, like a man scenting rain. Harlow's jaw flexed and released. The bailiff straightened and redistributed weight through his heels. Somewhere beyond the walls, a copier ran a long, rattling job, pages spitting out like white flags no one would wave. Riley leaned close and whispered, "Help me help you. What should I expect?" Maya breathed in and let the air out through her nose. "Noise," she said, the first word from her in a while, soft but certain. Benton's laugh arrived late, quiet, placed just under audibility, a sound you might mistake for a chair creak. He said, not loud, "You really think anyone's coming?" He didn't say what else hung in his teeth, but I heard it anyway. Harlow checked the hallway again. The ADA looked bored. Keen scratched. The light stuttered once, and then held steady. A clerk wheeled the monitor back to its corner. The plug dragged and clicked. Somebody in row 3 coughed hard and apologized. Riley stacked his folder, squared the edges, squared them again. Maya adjusted the strap on her bag by half an inch. The bailiff looked up like he'd sensed a movement a second before it happened. Benton rolled his shoulders. Harlow set both hands on the table and let them sit. I realized the room had settled into that peculiar hush right before a summer storm when the wind forgets its job and trees hold their breath together. In that lull, the door at the back opened and closed without sound. Lauren returned to her seat, with her blazer buttoned now, posture tweaked a degree. She didn't look at Maya. She didn't look at Benton. She looked at Keene with the small, polite interest of a woman visiting a museum she helped fund. She adjusted the watch once more. A minimal correction, a pilot's hand on a dial. The ADA noticed this time, and couldn't place why it needled her. The bailiff blinked twice. Benton's tongue hit the back of his teeth, and he smiled something thin. The judge recited the final notes as if reading street names from a map he couldn't change. Continue to this, remand under that. File by then. The clerk gathered. The ADA nodded. The defense nodded. The room nodded. A last minute felt like a last mile. I watched Lauren's hand flatten against her bag like checking for a heartbeat. Riley's mouth formed a word. He didn't speak. Maya looked at the spot where the monitor had been, then looked away. The bailiff cleared his throat. Benton leaned forward just enough. "No one's here for you," he breathed. "Not even her." Maya didn't react. She stared through him, past him, into that strip of air where truth sometimes glints like fishing line. Lauren didn't turn. She didn't blink, but the watch's face caught the light again. And you could swear, if you've ever sat in rooms like this, that something answered from a place you couldn't see. A small vibration in the floor, a new frequency in the hum, the unremarkable scrape of a door somewhere deep in the building. The judge lifted his gavel for the day's last knock. The room leaned forward without knowing it. Then everything held, waiting. The line was meant to slip under the ribcage, quiet enough to dodge attention, honed to draw blood. It wasn't a threat so much as a coronation, a victory claimed before the bell. Maya didn't blink, didn't glance his way. She simply held her seat, spine straight, eyes on air no one else could see. Yet the room tilted, a small tectonic shove that began with furniture. Somewhere behind us, a single chair whispered across tile, polished wood sighing backward. In ordinary noise, it would have vanished. In this hush, it rang like metal, a signal flare disguised as manners. It was a chair from the last row, moved by a woman who had barely breathed since the hearing began. Lauren Price rose, not angry, not frantic, composed in a way that made heads turn before she took a step. She came down the aisle unhurried, the cadence of someone with the map memorized, one step another. The pace said inevitability, not urgency. A few people leaned forward, others forgot to inhale. No one spoke. By the time she reached the center gap, even the fluorescence seemed to dim. For the first time in minutes, Judge Rowan Keene actually looked up. His eyes narrowed first in puzzlement, then pinched with worry. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," he said, voice rehearsed for command, fraying at the edges. "Authority needs buy-in." Hers didn't. Lauren didn't stop. She stepped into the open space between benches and bar, lifted her hands with deliberate calm, and reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. Faces flickered through micro-hesitations. Bailiff, clerk, jurors, like everyone remembered a training video at once. Even Trevor Benton's shoulders tightened. The sound in the room thinned to wire. The silence changed temperature, from awkward to live current. Inside lay a federal credential. No county foil seal, no state crest. Engraved, stamped, unmistakable. Lauren raised her voice for the first time, not loud, perfectly steady. "Agent Lauren Price, Central Intelligence Agency, Office of Internal Oversight." The syllables dropped like stones into still water. No echo, just gravity. Theater ended. Procedure began. The judge's mouth stalled. A.D. Elise Marsh forgot her pen mid-curl. The clerk froze halfway through a turn. Benton didn't blink. Neither did Dane Harlow. And Maya, hands still, gazed forward, as if this beat had always been on the score. Nothing in her face said surprise. It read like confirmation. A checkpoint passed. Lauren remained upright, badge set in her palm. No sermon, no drama. Just presence you couldn't walk around. I felt something in my chest loosen and cinch at once, like a taut thread finally giving way. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It carried weight, like air after thunder far off. The story people believed they were watching rewrote itself mid-sentence, and the punctuation changed. Keene opened his mouth, shut it, tapped the bench twice. Lauren didn't fill the space. She let silence deliver. Her stillness spoke enough. In that breath-held interval, something cracked, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the finality of a seal breaking. Lauren didn't raise her volume. She raised the record. She opened a slim folder and read like balancing a ledger everyone had avoided. 4 years ago, Officer Trevor Benton used force on a 14-year-old during a routine stop in Kingsbury. The boy's shoulder was dislocated. He was unarmed. No arrest. Complaint filed. Charges dismissed. File closed. She turned the page. Paper made a sound like truth lightly clearing its throat. She moved to the next leaf, cadence unshaken. 3 years ago, Officer Dane Harlow was linked to removal of seized narcotics from an evidence locker. Surveillance lost. Chain of custody flagged. Internal Affairs requested review. ADA Elise Marsh declined prosecution for insufficient verification. Another page. Last year, a black minor, female, 15, named as key witness in a local abuse inquiry involving Benton and Harlow. Statement retracted after repeated contact with both officers. Parents filed complaint. Judge Rowan Keene ruled inadmissible. Case dismissed prior to hearing. She closed the file. All three matters were calendared for judicial review in this courthouse, Lauren said. All three denied air? The tone didn't rise. It landed where it meant to. She looked toward the bench. Blocked by this chamber, silenced by this prosecutor. Marsh's reply cracked before it formed. This isn't relevant. Lauren didn't pivot. Concealing misconduct is always relevant. The room changed on breath, not sound. People understood the lens had widened. What sat in front of us was no longer a single docket. It was the design. You could feel the gallery relearning how to listen. Deliberately, Lauren placed a second document on the clerk's desk. The seal caught the dull lights and held. Federal orders issued at 6:28 a.m. Authorization for immediate detention, signed by oversight and internal bureau review. Keene didn't move. A side door sighed open. Two men in dark suits entered, not rushing, not pausing, just professional gravity. One oriented to Benton, the other to Harlow. Benton stood too fast. His chair screamed against tile. His hands hovered, seeking orders that weren't coming. Harlow half rose to protest. The agent behind him caught his wrist, turned, and the cuffs spoke. Gasps broke loose like dropped marbles. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," and covered it. A juror leaned in, forgetting neutrality. Two rows back, a woman wiped at her eyes. At counsel table, Maya sat still, watching the choreography she'd expected finally arrive on cue. Marsh said nothing. Keene's hand hovered over the gavel, as if memory of its purpose had faded. Lauren didn't look at the officers. She held Keene's gaze. Something fractured across his expression, less shattering than surrender. A man realizing the room no longer answered to him. The agents walked Benton and Harlow up the aisle. No one interposed. Not the prosecutor, not the bailiff, not the judge. The cuffs gleamed under courthouse lights like overdue arithmetic. When the door shut behind them, Lauren's attention returned to her daughter. Maya didn't grin, didn't nod, but her eyes found Lauren's, and a message crossed the space. Neither triumph nor revenge. Clarity. The gallery's gaze shifted, as if a camera had refocused. They weren't watching a problem anymore. They were looking at a mirror. Justice, quiet and deliberate, had found a voice that didn't need volume. For several long beats, the room breathed as one. The cuffs were out of sight, but the new silence stayed, no longer heavy like fatigue, but balanced on a hinge about to turn. Riley glanced from bench to blank monitor, found his footing, and spoke without volume. Your Honor, the video previously excluded is resubmitted. It has now been authenticated and certified by federal authority. Keene didn't authorize and didn't forbid. He simply failed to interfere. Riley nodded toward the clerk, and the screen woke. Between them, the same truth unfolded. An elderly black man entered frame, uncertain, hands raised, a body language all apology. He posed no threat. Benton stepped into him, shoulders square, shoved him hard. The cane wobbled. The man rocked back. Maya appeared, immediate and unshowy, placing herself between force and harm, arms out, still as a levee. No yelling, no shove back, just presence exactly where the absence had been. When the clip ended, the quiet was different. Recognition pulled up a chair and sat with us. Lauren took a single step forward. "This isn't justice," she said, voice like level ground. "It's damage control." She didn't address Keene or Marsh so much as the room itself. "What you saw isn't a mistake. It's the system functioning as designed, until someone refuses to yield." She never said Maya's name. She didn't need to. A tremor went through the benches. Near the back, a woman clutched her tote, then stood. A man followed, then another, then a row. The gallery rose, not for spectacle, but for truth. Maya remained seated, steady as a cornerstone. Her hands rested in her lap. The cuffs were gone, yet their ghosts lingered like a ring on a table. Even so, she didn't look reduced. She looked grounded. Riley returned to her side and didn't speak. He simply stood level with her, shoulder to shoulder, as if language might dilute the moment. Maya placed both feet flat, straightened her back, and set her gaze on no one in particular. She didn't smile or perform gratitude. Recognition requires neither. From the last bench, a phone rose. A young reporter adjusted her angle, the lens claiming daylight. The public was about to see what this room tried to bury. Lauren turned away from the bench and toward the people standing shoulder to shoulder behind the rail. "It's never about who shouts loudest," she said. "It's about who refuses to look away." No one sat. Keene sat motionless, not defiant, but dawning to the fact that power had slipped its leash and walked out. Maya rose. Riley eased aside, making space rather than presenting her. She didn't lift her arms. She didn't wave. She moved past the defense table, slow, quiet, toward the hallway light. The silence traveled with her. Sometimes the truest verdict is the one no one says aloud. In that minute, there wasn't a doubt about who had won. When Maya stepped into daylight, the world didn't erupt. No sirens, no shouted questions, no crush of bodies, just the click of her soles on stone and a light wind threading the columns. The courthouse doors breathed open behind her. Nobody followed. No bailiff, no officer, not a glance from the judge. Lauren matched her pace, beside, not leading, not shielding, just there. They descended the steps like they'd timed this days ago. A small knot of people had gathered, but words lagged behind. They parted to make room. Some stared in stunned quiet. Others studied their hands as if touch might translate meaning. The moment held, then cracked softly. A voice came through, small, honest, without push. She didn't yell and still changed everything. It came from a kid no older than 11, standing next to her mother. Tight braids, a jacket patched with a butterfly at the shoulder. She didn't grin. She watched like kids who recognize truth before adults agree to name it. Maya turned, met her eyes, and nodded. A journalist edged forward from the side, microphone lowered, tone careful. "Why didn't you fight back?" he asked. Maya paused, not searching for words, but feeling the weight their travel would carry. She let the quiet work, let it breathe. Then she said it soft, certain, like handing someone a tool. "Sometimes silence isn't fear, it's strategy." No applause followed. None was needed. A breeze carried the sentence outward. An hour later, a short clip posted. By midday, it slid across timelines and screens that rarely host courtrooms. The words did the traveling. The room simply held. Her name trended without confetti. It wasn't celebration, it was recognition. Not of a single moment, but of a way people have been moving for a long time, quietly, persistently, finally visible. Inside the courthouse, the shift kept rolling. Adia Elise Marsh, left by a staff corridor, hands empty, gaze down. No statement, no spin. Her silence weighed more than any closing she'd attempted. Within 2 days, her name vanished from the prosecutor directory. The resignation blurb was brief and unadorned. Screenshots of her expression in court told a longer story than press releases ever could. In chambers, Judge Keene sat alone, gavel untouched, the bench's aura gone thin. He lingered long after the hallway emptied, as if the building's quiet might testify for him. It didn't. By the following week, a formal ethics inquiry opened, filed not by CIA, not by defense, but by his own clerk, who had sat through every docket call like furniture and recorded everything. As for Benton and Harlow, they spent the night in separate holding cells. No badges, no belts, no PR buffer. Intake erases swagger fast. They knew the sound of silence now, nobody coming. Back at Lauren's small living room, Maya folded into the couch corner, shoes off, legs tucked. The TV stayed black. No doom scrolling, just breath and shared quiet. Lauren sat beside her, arm along the back cushion, not pulling her close, not pushing distance, presence tuned exactly to need. Outside, noise rose. Courtroom clips, stills of Maya standing still, the answer that kept circling the world. Why didn't you yell? Because silence isn't fear, it's strategy. Some called it brave, some called it brilliant. Most used her name, not defendant, not girl in the video, Maya. It started with a blink and miss moment, Maya's unposed half smile as she stepped away from the courthouse, shoulders looser, eyes leveled. The frame lasted less than a second. Somebody caught it and someone else captioned, "This is what dignity looks like." By morning, the clip had crossed 6 million screens. Anchors replayed it bare, No voiceover. Columnists called it the day the system blinked. One headline read, "A hearing that ended in a whisper." Another, "The girl who never raised her voice." Noise grew around her. Inside, she remained still. Maya didn't give interviews. She didn't post a thread. She didn't restate what she'd already made plain. A week later, she walked into a new school, different hall, different traffic. No entourage, no cameras, just a teenager with a backpack and a pace that understood the floor. Hair pulled back, plain sweater. She moved like anyone else, but the air around her learned a new current. Some eyes lowered, not dodging, honoring. Others met hers, steady, respectful, unannounced. A girl by the window slid her bag from the spare seat. Maya sat, no words, no performance. Enough. Across the street, in a dented sedan with a crooked mirror, Lauren sat behind the wheel. She'd promised not to hover. She kept the promise, stayed curbside long enough to watch Maya disappear into that corridor of lockers and fluorescent buzz. In that short pause, between exhale and ignition, her shoulders finally sank the smallest degree. Her hands loosened on the wheel. A quiet breath slipped out, the kind of release people don't notice until it's gone. Downtown on the courthouse lawn, someone planted a sign on a simple stake. "Accountability begins here." No one needed credit. Tourists took photos. Teachers drafted lessons around it. Organizers used it as a landmark during marches, holding silence like conversation. The sign didn't shout. It stood, like the girl who made it necessary. Soon a new video spread. No narration, no pundits, just slow piano and a sequence. Maya stepping between force and an old man. Maya seated with wrists bound. Maya watching a room tilt. Maya walking into daylight. Final frame in white on black. To every girl told to sit down. You were always meant to rise. People shared it without commentary. It didn't need captions. It didn't crave argument. Mothers sent it to daughters. Teachers played it before first period. A librarian printed the final line and pinned it above biographies, beneath names of women whose stories had once been kept quiet. Somewhere far from any columned facade, a teenager sat by her window, reading in late light. She'd been told more than once that her voice was soft, that quiet meant she'd vanish. She watched the montage again, and her hands stopped shaking. Silence wasn't vacuum. It was a tool, a place where courage could stage itself. If any of this reaches you, let it settle. What took place in that room wasn't merely about statutes or sanctions. It was about dignity, the stubborn, everyday kind, carried by people told they don't count who show up anyway. It was about a young woman who never raised her voice and still made a room full of power hold still. If stories like that matter to you, stories that speak when the world goes mute, that tug us toward who we say we are, tap the heart. Share this with someone who forgets that quiet can move steel. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Black Culture Story. We don't just spin narratives, we archive what silence remembers. Your support keeps us building human centered work worth sitting with. Every like, every comment, every share becomes oxygen for the next voice we help uncover. That's the promise and the practice. Meanwhile, back in the city's working rooms, paperwork moved like weather. Files rerouted. Names got highlighted. Some logs grew teeth. The momentum wasn't thunder, it was tide, slow, insistent, pulling stubborn boats away from the sandbar. The day after Lauren's disclosure, a memo circulated quietly through the precinct. Terms like interim reassignment, external audit, and preservation of evidence appeared in black and white. Officers signed receipt lines they used to skim. A training bulletin added 2 slides no one liked reading about bystander filming and custodial boundaries. The city's PR office released a tight statement full of verbs that dodge responsibility: assessing, reviewing, exploring. Community groups translated it into plain talk and made checklists. The difference between promises and plans is ink, signatures, deadlines. People began bringing pens. Media vans found curb space but didn't own it. Pastors stood beside teens. Aunties brought sandwiches. Lawyers answered questions without pretending the process was clean. In those hallways, a different hush took root, the listening kind. Riley laid filings like stones across a river, making crossings. He didn't speak for Maya, he made room. Lauren met with oversight staffers who understood the letter and the subtext. None mistook exposure for repair. It was the beginning of work, not the finish. A reporter asked if Maya felt vindicated. She said the word was too small and left it there. Vindication is a headline, she told one teacher after class. What we need is maintenance. The teacher wrote that on a post-it and hid it in a desk drawer, a private promise. One afternoon, the older man from the footage, Mr. Albright, came to the school office with a thank you card and cinnamon candies. He moved slow, but steady. Maya met him near the door. They didn't hug. They stood, palms together for a second like passing an invisible weight back and forth. You shouldn't have had to, he said. Neither should you, she answered. Meanwhile, a civil rights clinic downtown filed notice to preserve records tied to the 3 cases Lauren named. Volunteers began scanning. A retired judge, widowed, long out of robes, offered to review procedure with students. For education, she said, eyes sharp. She remembered when forms were carbon paper and pressure mattered. The city council scheduled a hearing with a title that sounded like furniture. Committee on Administrative Practices, but the room overfilled anyway. People spoke in paragraphs, not slogans. They didn't ask for miracles. They asked for receipts and for doors that stay open when cameras leave. Saturday morning, Lauren brewed coffee and sat with Maya at the kitchen table. The badge stayed in a drawer. People in her line know when to put tools away. You okay? She asked. Maya nodded, then revised. I'm moving. Lauren smiled the almost smile she used when words needed catching. They talked durable things, laundry cycles, math quizzes, the neighbor's loud dog. They didn't perform resilience. They practiced it. Later they walked the block, counted blue doors, and traded jokes about crooked mailboxes. Someone had chalked a small message near the curb. Keep choosing. You'd miss it if you rushed. The clip kept scattering outward. Coaches quoted it at practice. Principals read it at assemblies. An editor spiked an op-ed that tried to turn Maya into a cudgel and ran a different piece about community noise that sounds like prayer. One precinct tried a listening session and botched it. The second one tried and did better. It turns out humility has a learning curve. A local artist painted a small mural near the bus stop. Maya's arms out, faceless, so anyone could step into the outline. Kids posed there, laughed serious, and then headed to class. Corporate accounts tried to co-opt the moment and got ratioed. The algorithm is not immune to embarrassment. Meanwhile, in the building with the clock that lies, the clerk who filed the ethics complaint ate lunch alone and didn't mind. A public records request produced emails that read like furniture being dragged at midnight. Keene retained counsel. Marsh disappeared from comment. Benton and Harlow met federal defenders who advised silence, their first efficient use of it. In the evenings, the courthouse lawn kept collecting shoe prints and quiet. A student journalist asked for an interview. Maya declined but offered coffee. They talked about craft, how to write so people feel instead of flinch. The student kept the recorder off and took notes on paper. Ink remembers differently, she said. Maya liked that. Another afternoon, Lauren took her to a thrift store, and they laughed at a velvet blazer with rhinestone cuffs. The world tried to make them mascots. They chose errands. On the courthouse steps, someone added a second sign under the first, "We hold the room." At dusk, you'd see strangers on that lawn holding small vigils that looked like neighbors sharing shade. No chants, no megaphones, just presence. A janitor wheeled out a trash can and handed extra bags with a nod. People tidied up. Discipline can look like tenderness. In precinct updates, verbs shifted, implementing, auditing, suspending. A captain who loved to hear himself talk discovered listening and kept at it. The interim chief kept writing notes long after cameras left. On a call with community groups, he skipped slogans and asked for checklists. Plain language worked. Law is a tool. Repair is the work. One evening, Maya and Lauren visited Mr. Albright's tiny apartment. He insisted on making tea and oversweetening it. The cane leaned against the radiator like a witness off duty. He told them about his late wife's church hat collection and the day he almost moved to Mobile but didn't. They looked at photo albums where smiles did heavy lifting. When they left, he pressed a peppermint into Maya's palm. For breath, he said. She kept it in her pocket for a week and then used it before a math test. The internet tried to crown Maya a symbol larger than her life. She refused the throne. She still did dishes. She still checked on her friend's little brother after school. She still made time for nothing in particular. Lauren kept working inside the lanes oversight allows. Patient, exact. She was not a vigilante. She was a ledger that finally balanced. The biggest change was small. When Maya walked into rooms, adults stopped trying to interpret her quiet as emptiness. They let it be a choice, a tool, a kind of speech. Within 48 hours, precinct leadership rotated. An interim chief with a pocket notebook stepped in and said 3 unfancy sentences about standards, decency, and truth. He meant them. He kept writing things down long after cameras left. The city attorney announced a review of dismissed complaints, no adjectives attached. A civil oversight board added 2 youth seats and filled them with kids who already carried clipboards. A local union leader bristled on television, then called Lauren the next day to ask for a meeting that, by all accounts, went better than expected. Keene's hearing before the ethics panel ran quiet and long. Lawyers spoke in careful weather, the kind that soaks you if you stand in it. The clerk testified without flourish and returned to work the next day like anybody. Reports landed on desks with less dust than usual. Meanwhile, Maya joined a small after-school group that ran debate drills without the shouting. The coach told them argument is architecture, not arson. She liked that enough to write it in the margin of her history notes and underline it twice. Benton and Harlow learned the choreography of arraignment, the geometry of waiting rooms where no one knows anyone's last name. A specialist explained federal procedure in a voice entirely free of swagger. The men nodded a lot. Cameras lost interest because there was no spectacle to sell, only consequences. The reporters who stayed filed pieces with fewer adjectives and more sentences that ended in periods. In the background, the oversight office kept counting things systems try to forget: minutes, signatures, custody logs, the small places where truth gets misfiled. Back at home, the quiet earned that day became a habit. TV off more nights than on. Books open more often than not. Maya sat on the floor to stretch before homework. Lauren worked a crossword with a chewed pencil. They didn't talk about the courthouse much. Not avoidance, design. If rage is a spark, care is the wiring. On Sundays, they cooked too much food and carried containers to neighbors. The girl with the butterfly patch passed by one afternoon and waved like she'd updated a secret map. When the next hearing date finally arrived, the gallery filled early, but this time, the room's hush felt purposeful, not pinned. Keene took the bench with edges sanded down. Marsh's chair stayed empty. The clerk called the docket, and people actually listened. Riley made 2 brief points about authentication and chain of custody. Keene allowed them without drama, perhaps learning that compliance can sound like humility. Maya sat through it, like a person sits through weather they can't change, prepared and patient. The ceiling lights didn't flicker. The clock still lied. By then, the sign on the lawn had a second scuffed board beside it. "We hold the room." Someone had added a small drawing of a chair in chalk, an inside joke for anyone who'd been there when it started. Tourists asked what it meant. Locals smiled and told the short version, then the longer one if the light held. The young reporter who'd raised the camera wrote a follow-up article with a line that stuck: "The day the gallery became a conscience." Her editor didn't cut it. Sometimes editors know when to stay out of the way. A regional paper ran a profile on Lauren that refused to romanticize the work. It mentioned early mornings, late memos, and the precision of pressing a watch face twice. It talked about lineage, not legend, and used a silhouette instead of a portrait. Meanwhile, Maya's math teacher wrote strategy above the day's problem set and circled it twice. Strategy wasn't tricks, it was placement. In the hallway, a freshman asked if being quiet ever felt lonely. "Sometimes," Maya said, "but not when the room remembers why we're here." The kid nodded and wrote that down. The platform metrics kept doing what metrics do, spiking, drifting, spiking again, and the world kept being itself. A grocery cashier recognized Maya and didn't make it weird. The bus driver offered a nod instead of a speech. A cousin texted a heart and a photo of a dog. Normal isn't the opposite of progress, it's often the goal. On a Tuesday, Maya took the long way home to walk past a community garden. A hand-lettered sign read, "Water slowly." She laughed under her breath. The gardens that last are the ones people tend without applause. 2 months later, a settlement discussion appeared on the docket. No headlines, just filings. Another oversight brief detailed patterns that would later look obvious. A deputy mayor tried to count wins in a press conference and got the tense wrong. The work wasn't past tense yet. At school, Maya joined a small film club that edited with silence as a tool, letting scenes breathe. In one cut, the loudest sound was footsteps on stone. She didn't explain why that mattered. Lauren attended a neighborhood meeting and mostly listened. Listening, it turned out, scowled. One morning, Lauren set the watch beside her coffee and looked at it like a diver studying the surface. Then she slid it back into the drawer and opened the window instead. A breeze moved the kitchen curtain. Maya patted in with socks and an oversized hoodie, stole a sip, made a face, then grinned. They planned nothing heroic. Groceries, laundry, a library run. The world doesn't need a parade when something good is done. It needs upkeep. That afternoon, they cooked simple food and delivered containers next door, returning home before the streetlights cut on. Out by the courthouse, the wood sign weathered and the paint cracked, which made it better. Someone replaced a missing screw. Someone else tucked flowers into the post hole. A parent took a picture of their kid standing next to it, arms spread like the mural. On a church bulletin, the week's theme read, "Hold the room." The pastor credited a girl downtown and left it there. A caseworker copied the phrase onto a sticky note and pressed it inside a folder she carried into tough houses. Words can be tools when you don't swing them like hammers. A short new montage appeared online. Again spare, again piano. Maya between force and a fragile body. Maya's wrists ringed and resting. Maya staring at a dark screen that should have been enough the first time. Maya walking out into daylight as if it had always been hers. Final frame. To everyone told to wait your turn, take it now. People shared it without commentary. The librarian who'd pinned the earlier line added this one beside it. She watched kids pause in front of the shelf, mouth the words, then pull down a book like a promise. Some nights, Maya lay awake and replayed the room, not to relive it, but to sort the pieces like cards, where silence helped, where it hurt, where it changed shape. She discovered it functioned like a fuse, like a shield, like a lens. She learned to choose among them. When classmates asked for advice, she didn't give speeches. She asked questions. What's your goal? Who's the audience? How do you want to feel afterward? Strategy rarely sounds glamorous. It sounds like homework because it is. She turned off her lamp and slept. If this story found you and moved something even a little, let it find a place to rest. The courthouse sequence wasn't only about punishment or policy, it was about posture, about the way people carry themselves when institutions try to fold them small. It was about a young woman who didn't raise her voice and made a building listen anyway. If that matters to you, pass it along. Share it with someone who thinks loud is the only lever. Remind them quiet can be the fulcrum. Let the idea do its work. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to Black Culture Story. Around here, we don't chase spectacle, we preserve what quiet remembers. Your support keeps this kind of work alive, reporting that centers people, not algorithms. Likes, comments, shares, those are small votes that add up to the next story getting told well. Thank you for being the kind of audience that listens on purpose. The algorithm might not reward patience, but history does. We'll keep showing up in the rooms that try to swallow their echoes and pretend nothing happened. Updates kept stacking. A policy memo turned into an ordinance with teeth. Training became requirement instead of suggestion. Complaint intake added a second set of eyes, and a number people actually called. None of it was perfect. All of it was movement. In a civics class, a student mapped the timeline on butcher paper: the shove, the stand, the tap of a watch, the badge, the cuffs, the clip, the exit. The class labeled each with verbs they chose: intervene, reveal, reckon, repair. The teacher underlined repair and left the board full. Months later, no statues had been raised for Maya, which suited her fine. She preferred benches you could sit on. The mural near the bus stop got scuffed by a delivery cart, and a kid fixed it with chalk. Imperfect and perfect. Mr. Albright donated his late wife's hat boxes to a church theater troupe that needed them for a play. The fig at home lost 3 leaves and then made 5 new ones, stubborn as ever. Lauren serviced the car, replaced wiper blades, scheduled a dental cleaning. Justice shares a calendar with groceries. The channel kept telling stories that the loud parts of the internet skip: boring, beautiful, necessary truths. If you've been with us for a while, you know the rhythm. If you're just arriving, welcome. Add your quiet to ours. Hold a room where you are. And if you can, press the heart, pass the link, subscribe to Black Culture Story. These are small actions with a long tail. They help us keep listening where it's easiest to look away. The next voice is already clearing its throat. With your help, we won't miss it. Black Culture Story, where we don't just tell what happened, we tell what silence learned. Your support is how we keep the lights on and the notebooks open. Every like is a nudge, every comment a footprint, every share a hand extended to someone who needs steadiness more than noise. Thanks for walking with us. Thanks for believing that the quieter path can still move mountains. Tap subscribe, stay close, and bring a friend. We'll be here, patient, precise, and ready to listen, because the work doesn't end with a verdict. It begins when people refuse to look away. Lesson 1: Silence, properly aimed, is power. Those of us who remember black and white broadcasts and church basement organizing also know this. Dignity can speak louder than a shout. In that cramped courtroom, paint flaking, clock lying, Maya didn't win with volume. She won with placement. She stood between an old man with a cane and the officer who shoved him. Later she sat, steady as a fence post, while grown professionals pretended not to see a fresh bruise. Many of you have felt a room tilt like that when people in charge look down at their paper until the moment passes. But Maya's quiet was not surrender. It was a tool. She held her line, named the harm, and let evidence do the talking. For older Americans who have kept families together on thin budgets and thinner patience, that discipline rings familiar. Silence is not absence. It is a form of leadership when it refuses to look away. Lesson 2: Repair beats headlines. Accountability that sticks. The badge Lauren lifted didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived like bookkeeping: calm, exact, undeniable. In a nation raised on big speeches, she offered ledgers, dates, files, custody logs, and the cuffs clicked on the right wrists. Many of you know this slow kind of victory: the follow through after the march, the minutes and signatures that keep change from sliding back. What followed wasn't confetti, it was maintenance. Policies gained teeth. Supervisors learned to listen. A clerk filed an ethics complaint and went back to work like any Tuesday. That's the part elders understand best. Vindication is a headline. Repair is a schedule. It happens in inches, on courthouse lawns where neighbors stand shoulder to shoulder, in classrooms where kids learn that argument is architecture, not arson, and at kitchen tables where we choose decency again before the streetlights come on. If we want our grandkids to inherit something sturdier than slogans, we keep records, we show up, and we water the gardens slowly. Quiet built this. Quiet will keep it. Let this sit under your ribs. The work isn't loud, but it lasts. Friends, which moment stayed with you most? The hush after the slap, the 2 taps on Lauren's watch, the cuffs that finally found the right hands, or the small sign on the lawn that read, "We hold the room." In your own life, when has silence worked better than shouting? And how did you make it count? Share your story below so others can learn from it. If this moved you, please like the video, leave a thoughtful comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your support helps this community grow and brings more neighbors into conversations that actually repair what's broken.